Hi, I'm Cadet Alice Maggs. What is your name, please?
It's Charles Neville Shereston.
What years were you a cadet?
I joined in February 1942 and I finished roughly somewhere around about the autumn of 43.
Who was your CO?
It was the Reverend Campbell Miller.
What rank did you achieve in the cadets?
Same as when I joined the cadets. No, I'm not going to elaborate on that. Off camera I will.
Why did you join?
Well, probably totally different. You would have to understand that the time of it was. We were smack in the middle of the war. All the propaganda was to young men to join the forces, and that was what we wanted to be. Naively, probably, we all thought we could join and be pilot officers, and that was the reason. Basically, if you wanted to go in the Air Force, you joined the Air Corps because you assumed it was a stepping stone to getting aircrew.
What was your most memorable time in the squadron?
Well, there was no particular, what you call, memorable moments. Because basically it was what you really enjoyed, if anything, was the fact of being in a group of like-minded people, and it was different. It was different age, different time. You didn't have the distractions. I mean, if you appreciate myself and some of the other cadets, we'd all left school at 14. We were round about 16. We'd already been at work where the vast majority of the cadets were still at school. And there was a little slight difference between us, that we considered we were men and the rest of them were schoolboys.
Where was the squadron based?
It was at the Magnus School in Avenue. It was obviously at Newark, and it's still a school now. I think forget what it's called now.
What nights did you parade?
Now, I'm not absolutely certain. We used to go 2 nights a week. It was either a Monday or a Tuesday and a Thursday. It was definitely Thursday. I would have thought it was probably, if somebody else remembers better, it was probably Tuesday and Thursday.
What did you do on a normal parade night?
Well, as you can appreciate, it was in its infancy. There were not any specialist, what you would call instructors, because all the officers were school teachers from the grammar school. So the main things we did, there was not a lot. There was mathematics incorporated with plotting courses and navigation, Morse code, aircraft recognition, and later on in that particular year we joined, the unit was more or less split into 2, which you would basically call the aircrew section. This would be end of 42 onwards, and what you might call the engineering section. Well, the ones of us that were in the engineering section used to go on the Thursday night. We used to go to the Newark Technical College and learn aircraft engines and that sort of thing, and ordinary engineering schools. So you were more or less in two separate entities, and then obviously the ones that weren't in engineering, they would be going more from mathematics and course plotting and things associated with being trained for aircrew.
Which section were you in? Which section were you in? You
Well,
said it was split up. Which?
Well,
side?
as I said, there were basically two sections because you were then either the engineering section or the aircrew section. You weren't. We were nearly all the work, not like you do now, was all classroom near enough. And if you appreciate, at the time, we could do nothing outside because of the blackout. There was no lighting or anything was allowed. So we did do, when wet lights were dark, it was all inside work. And mostly 90% of it was.
What activities did you take part in with the Air Training Corps?
Active duties. Well, it was, well, I would have considered it was more or less an extension. It was of being at school, really, because nearly everything we did was either on the board, on the drawing boards, or diagrams, or perhaps you may occasionally have a slideshow or with a camera like, but it was very little what you would call hands-on things. Most of it, you would say, would be academic, if anything, and working from charts and diagrams and this. The only real thing I would say that was what you would call any hands-on was the Morse code and the signalling part. Otherwise, it was more or less all classroom stuff, or majority of it was.
What did you do in your adult life?
In adult life, well, I was, until I was 18, I was an apprentice plater at the local boiler firm. I then had 4 years in the army, and I came out of the army and settled down in the town, and worked for 38 years at a local pump firm, both in the shop floor and on the management.
Did being a cadet help influence your life afterwards?
Well, in retrospect, I realised that what it did do, that if you again appreciate, most of the class we were in, or the cadets, the majority were at school, and they were at the grammar school, which was more or less being trained for university, and went to 18. Well, with us finishing at 14, we had a lot of catching up doing, and in one respect, I had practically learned more academically in the Air Cadets in the 2 years I was in than I did at school. In my case, in what to answer the question really, I found that was one of the main things, that it also, shall we say, made me more interested in further education, as we would call it now. But at the time we didn't think it, because we just did it and tried to keep up with the rest of the cadets in the class.
Are you still in contact with any of your ex-cadet friends?
I'm afraid, well, I might have well put my age as well, at 87 there are not a great, in fact, I'm possibly not in contact with any of them, because as far as I know, those that are alive have probably left the district. There are odd ones that I know that have been in the cadets, probably later years, and one or two, but not many. As I say, after I'd finished with the cadets, the year after I was away from the town for 4 years, and these things happened.
What do you remember about the CO, Reverend Campbell Miller?
Well, the fact that he was the headmaster of the school, and to be honest, I remember very little of him. I obviously knew of him. I can't recall that he did in any instruction at all, and other than probably taking an assembly or a parade probably through the town possibly, he was very seldom, as far as I can remember, in attendance. He would probably spend the time during the sessions we were there in the headmaster's office, because he was still the headmaster of the school. He was not what I would have considered a commanding officer in the normal sense of what you would expect.
It was wartime. What did you do in the war?
Well, I was in 1944. I joined the Grenadier Guards. did obviously my basic training, and I then, in the early 1945, I went to Holland and Germany and Denmark, and at the end of the war I finished up in Berlin, and from then on I did possibly 2.5 years in what was known as the British Occupation Forces of Berlin, which was, well, basically we were assisting the police force and more or less over right control and in charge of displaced persons, a bit like with the refugees from Syria and all that. Where at the end of the war we obviously had in Europe a lot of people from Eastern Europe and places like that.
Is there anything else you remember about the squadron?
About
the squadron?
Well, it was something we wanted to do. I suppose it was a sort of a prestige thing as well. Probably, I shouldn't say this, but we in the Air Corps, and I suppose it installed from the officers being teachers, that we were a little bit above the Army Cadets and Naval Cadets, although I wasn't particularly sure there was a Naval Cadets. I can remember the Army Cadets in just towards the end of I was in, but we were considered, we were the superior service. I mean, that was a lot of the thing.
Thank you for coming to
It's all right, my dear, it's been a pleasure.